Donald Trump has lost every national poll since July 27th, the day after his opponent, Hillary Clinton, accepted the Democratic Party's nomination for president. While many attribute this to Trump's string of recent public gaffes, opponents of Hillary Clinton and skeptics of the election process have offered cries of skewed polls, that the information is being adjusted or tailored in her favor. Is that a fact? Is it even possible? Let's take a look at the polls and see if we can find the truth. This is The Loop. Now, currently, national polls show that Hillary Clinton has a strong lead over Donald Trump. That margin varies from poll to poll. Real Clear Politics places that margin at 7.9 points, while the 538 pegs it closer to 6.8 points. When and how did this happen? It seemed weeks ago, leading up to and even following the Republican National Convention, that Trump had a surge in public opinion, especially after the DNC was hacked on July 21st. Clinton led Trump in the polls by 0.6 points, the closest in the polls that they'd been since May 21st, the day Donald Trump was endorsed by the National Rifle Association. According to Real Clear Politics analysis, this is one of only 2 times that he'd actually led Clinton in the polls nationally. Now, what do I mean by that exactly? I mean that he didn't win one or even several polls, but won enough of them by wide enough margins during that period that on average, he was polling higher than Hillary Clinton was. Which, whatever you think of Donald Trump, is at least a little surprising. You think it would be more often. He seems nearly omnipresent in our national media, and his core supporters seem to back him no matter what he says. For example, Public Policy Polling did a recent survey in North Carolina that revealed that after Trump implied that the election was rigged, 69% of his supporters surveyed believed that if Hillary Clinton was elected president, it would only be because the election was rigged for her. In fact, this belief was so entrenched that when asked if ACORN, the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now, had stolen the election for Hillary, 40% of them said yes. This is significant as ACORN hasn't even existed since 2010. And what of Hillary Clinton? During the Democratic National Convention, CNN and CBS both did national polls that showed between 67 and 68% of Americans find her to be untrustworthy. And yet she's had a massive post-convention bounce, even though her acceptance speech at the convention's close was eclipsed by many that came before it, including President Barack Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama, and Khizr Khan, father of the late U.S. Army Captain Humayun Khan. But if you look at those speeches themselves, you can see the Democrats' strategy plainly and see why it's working long-term for Clinton. These speeches are more about pride in American values and about denouncing Donald Trump than they are about promoting Hillary Clinton as a candidate. In fact, it seems that the fewer headlines that Hillary herself appears in, the better she seems to do in the polls. At this point in her campaign, it seems Hillary Clinton is better off as the anti-Trump placeholder than as a candidate herself, which brings us to the question of skewed polls. Donald Trump, rightly or wrongly, is promoting himself for president aggressively, and his rallies still draw huge crowds. Could these polls be skewed in Hillary's favor? Harry Enton of the 538 wrote an excellent piece on the subject. Now, skewing as a concept is not a new one. In fact, we heard the same cries of poll skewing in the 2012 election between President Obama and Mitt Romney. The complaint made then and now is that polls use too many respondents who identify as Democrats instead of Republicans or independents, which makes sense, right? Polls should reflect an equal balance of all parties to get balanced results. For example, one of the potentially skewed polls cited in the piece is one from ABC News and the Washington Post, where 33% of respondents identified as Democrats, while 27% identified as Republicans. That poll showed that Hillary was ahead by 8 points. However, Enton asserts that the basic premise that party affiliation can skew results is completely flawed. Most polls aren't weighted by party identification. It's one of the questions asked by pollsters to respondents, not something known ahead of time, nor how they choose who to survey. He goes on to say that party identification is different from party registration. For example, in Kentucky, there are actually more registered Democrats than registered Republicans. But in 2014, more citizens identified as Republican than Democrat in state polls. In addition, poll respondents identify as Democrats more often than they identify as Republicans and have done so almost every year since the 1950s, except during the 70s presidencies of Ford and Carter and during the second term of Ronald Reagan's 80s presidency. Other than that, Democrat identification has essentially matched exit polls. Again, party identification is different from party registration. For example, with candidates as controversial and disliked within their own parties as Trump and Clinton are, we could see more registered Democrats and Republicans identifying as independent, libertarian, or green, depending on their chosen candidate. However, the website Longroom has a different point of view. The site claims that it takes the raw data from polls and unbiases the poll, revealing that in this election cycle, nearly all recent polls are biased in Clinton's favor. This is a claim that Enton disputes wholeheartedly because he says, quote, "Think about what that means. The website is saying that a large number of professional pollsters who make their living trying to provide accurate information and have a good good record of doing so, are deliberately biasing the polls and aren't correcting for it. Like many conspiracy theories, that seems implausible. Personally, I agree that on the face of it, the odds of every polling organization using their bias to skew information does seem implausible. An organization, I could believe that. Some organizations, I could believe that too, but nearly all of them, I need proof. Longroom's methodology is still murky. In the methodology section of their site, Longroom says they know that polls are biased because pollsters say that the polls are biased, but doesn't actually cite any organizations saying so. However, they do use a post by the 538's Nate Silver explaining their own methodology as proof of their own bias in their Polls Plus analysis. You can read that post via the description below if you're curious. Just so you know, the only statistics that I've used from their site are polls only. I do not use any statistics filtered through their proprietary algorithm specifically to avoid any skew that it may cause. Basically, and this is just me talking, I don't believe that the polls themselves are skewed in Hillary's favor, but I'm also not naive enough to assume that the sites that analyze them can't spin those results one way or another. Honestly, the polls seem to reflect the news that has been dominating the political conversation since the end of the Democratic National Convention. Look at the timeline. On July 27th, Donald Trump was leading in national polls by 0.9 points. That same day, he joked that Russia should hack Hillary Clinton's missing 30,000 emails. The next day, he and Clinton were tied. On July 30th, Donald Trump was trailing Clinton nationally by an average of 1.9 points. On that day, he criticized Keezer and Ghazala Khan and claimed that their late son was killed by Obama administration policies, which is impossible, as Captain Khan died in Iraq in 2004, 4 years before Obama took office. Within 48 hours on August 1st, Clinton's lead more than doubled at 4.4 points. On August 3rd, Joe Scarborough claimed that during a national security briefing, Donald Trump asked why America couldn't use its nuclear weapons 3 times in 1 hour. By the end of that day, Clinton's lead grew to 6.8 points. On August 9th, when Trump joked that Second Amendment people could take care of Hillary's perceived threat to gun ownership themselves, his numbers fell again, and Hillary's lead was 7.7 points. Every poll drop can be correlated to a poorly phrased or inflammatory public comment by Trump rather than any action by Hillary. Now, that isn't to say that Hillary Clinton is more loved than Trump by any stretch, but she's better at staying on message. She's remaining uncontroversial. The less people talk about her, the better she does. Trump is setting his chances of becoming president on fire nearly daily. There's a reason why this week's Time magazine cover is this, simply titled Meltdown. Now, there are reports that the DNC hack was much worse than we knew about previously, and that WikiLeaks is holding onto damning information until October when it can do more damage to Clinton. But until then, we'll have to wait and see whether Donald Trump can stay out of the news long enough to be able to take advantage. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think that poll skewing is a real thing, or do you think it's fake? Do you think it's possible that everyone is skewing polls in favor of Hillary Clinton? Let us know down in the comments below. Like this video, and until next time, you're in the loop. Thanks for watching. As the United States presidential election continues to rumble forward with Republican candidate Donald Trump,
Kylie Jenner is going to run for president in the future.